Hi there, it's Q3E11, and today we are exploring the topic apostasy and intercession. We've got a lot to cover today, so I may be skipping our usual introduction and key highlights, if that's okay with you. All right, then, let's get into it. If you recall, last week, God had invited the leadership team up the mountain 70 elders, Aaron, Nadab, and Abihu, and of course, Moses. Verse 11 of chapter 24 says, they saw God and even had a meal. Imagine that. Dining at the very edge of eternity. What a privilege.
Wait, they actually saw God? That's huge. So, what happened after?
Well, after this trip, God called up Moses again. This time, he went up with Joshua, his aide. And here's why: to receive the Ten Commandments etched by the very finger of God. But this time, Moses lingered there 40 days and 40 nights, alone with the Almighty.
But during that time, God wasn't silent. From chapters 25 to 31, he poured out the entire blueprint of the sanctuary. Every chamber, every piece of furniture, every garment of the priests. Nothing was decoration. Every detail pointed to Jesus and whispered of God's plan of redemption.
And when the 40 days ended, God placed into Moses' hand two tablets of stone engraved with the covenant itself, a relationship between heaven and earth, carved in stone.
That's incredible. But if Moses was gone that long, 40 days, what was happening down below with the people? Any clues?
Good question, Casey. That's where the story takes a shocking turn. If you recall, before Moses left, he handed over leadership to Aaron and Hur, telling them to handle matters of justice. But to address your question, we'll have to step into Exodus 32, and we will be approaching this chapter in five subsections. You ready? Let's get started. Papa Joe, can you please help us get started?
Sure. A. Section 1, verses 1 to 6. Now, here is where things take a dramatic turn. Exodus 32 begins with an interesting scene. Verses 1 reads, when the people saw that Moses was so long in coming down from the mountain, they gathered around Aaron and said, come, make us gods who will go before us. As for this fellow Moses who brought us up out of Egypt, we don't know what has happened to him.
Wait, are you telling me that after everything they had seen, the plagues, the Red Sea, manna, even eating in God's presence, and now they're asking for new gods?
Exactly. And that brings us to our first takeaway lesson. 1. The true state of the heart is revealed in the waiting. Think about it. These were people who had endured 400 years of slavery, every single one of them born into bondage, and had endured slavery from birth. Yet after just 40 days of waiting, they crack. All of a sudden, 40 days was now unbearable. It was just too long.
So, the real problem wasn't Moses' delay.
No, Casey, the real problem was their hearts. They were never truly converted. They enjoyed being part of the crowd that experienced God's blessings, but they never cultivated a personal relationship with the one who gave those blessings.
That's the danger of being a religious passenger. Always around God's presence, but never truly connected to Him.
So they were basically spectators, happy as long as things went smoothly, but ready to rebel at the first sign of discomfort?
Exactly. And doesn't that sound familiar? Ever met folks, or maybe caught yourself, active in church, busy in worship, always near the throne, but zero connection with the one who sits on it? Know all the theories but no experience. Waiting exposed them. Their impatience revealed their lack of intimacy with God. And that's a mirror for us, too. Waiting will always test whether our faith is rooted in God or just in His blessings.
Number two, the consequences of living in and around sin. Listen carefully to their proposed solution to Moses' absence. Not worship, and definitely not an intercessory prayer session. Instead, they demanded, "Come make us gods who will go before us."
Wait, what?
After all God had done, the plagues in Egypt, the Red Sea crossing, manna falling from heaven, they want other gods? How does that even make any sense?
That's exactly what I thought, Casey. This was not random. There is something about living in and around sin long enough that it desensitizes us to the sinfulness of sin and imperceptibly stirs up a lingering, hidden appetite for sin, waiting for an opportunity to manifest, if not fully surrendered to the Spirit of God.
We see this play out with the daughters of Lot. Even after God had delivered them from Sodom, the corruption of that city lingered in their hearts. Later, they got their father drunk and slept with him. And you wonder, where did that idea come from? Straight from Sodom's imprint. The same principle applies here. The golden calf wasn't a new idea. It must have been copied way back in Egypt, lingered in their hearts quietly, until the moment of waiting gave it permission to come alive because it was not fully yielded to God.
So, you're saying whatever sinful habits or passions we secretly hold on to, if not surrendered, will eventually find their way out?
Exactly. It's just a matter of time. Hidden desires, unyielded to God, always find a stage.
That's why the delay of Moses revealed more than impatience. It exposed what was already buried in their hearts. And it's a warning. What we fail to surrender today may rise up tomorrow to destroy us. Be warned.
3. The medium versus the source. Now listen closely to what motivated their proposal for a god. They said, "As for this fellow Moses who brought us up out of Egypt, we don't know what has happened to him."
Wait a second. Moses who brought them out? I thought it was God who brought them out.
And you're absolutely right, Casey. That's the problem. They confused the medium with the source. Moses was just the vessel. The power was never his.
Exactly. The medium is only a channel, valid as long as it stays connected to the source. Everything Moses gave them, leadership, guidance, even miracles, they came straight from God. Now, while the Lord encourages we respect and even honor our leaders, it's very important we understand their place and role in contrast to God's. There is a remarkable difference between both. Our gratitude and devotion should exclusively be to the source and not the medium. These people had it twisted. It was not Moses who brought them out of Egypt, it was God using Moses to lead them. Instead of fixing their eyes on the source, they made the mistake of anchoring their faith to the man, the medium, and not the source.
So, They shifted their focus from God to Moses, and when Moses was gone, their faith crumbled?
That is correct. And that's what happens when the medium becomes our reference point instead of the source. Leaders are treated as infallible and untouchable. Whatever they say must be right, even when it's obviously wrong. And when those leaders fall, the people fall with them, as we will see in the next verses.
So, the lesson here is clear. Respect the medium, but never confuse it with the source.
Exactly. Our devotion, our allegiance, our worship must belong to God alone. Anything less is misplaced faith. Their presence or absence should not dictate our spiritual temperature.
What happened next from verse 2 is even more shocking. Let's read. Aaron answered them, "Take off the gold earrings and bring them to me." So all the people took off their earrings and brought them to Aaron. He took what they handed him and made it into an idol cast in the shape of a calf, fashioning it with a tool. Then they said, "These are your gods, Israel, who brought you up out of Egypt."
Wait, Aaron? The same Aaron who just ate in God's presence on the mountain? He's the one leading this?
It gets worse. Verse 5 says Aaron built an altar in front of the calf and announced, "Tomorrow there will be a festival to the Lord." And the very next morning the people rose early, offered burnt sacrifices, and then plunged into drinking, eating, and outright revelry.
I can't believe this. They just pledged all the Lord says we will do. And now this?
This right here is the tragedy, Casey. Just days after covenant vows, the camp of God had turned into a festival of idol worship, validated not by outsiders but by their leader. Aaron did not just give in, he enabled them. He validated their rebellion by building an altar for the idol and stamping it with God's name. And this is what happens when God's people are led by spineless leaders, men and women who are more concerned with being politically correct than spiritually faithful, leaders who fear losing popularity more than dishonoring God.
The people made a bad choice, yes. But Aaron's silence, his actions, and his excuses made it far worse. That's why this story isn't just history. It's a warning. When leaders compromise God's truth for human approval, eternal destinies are placed at risk. Remember this.
Just think about this. A few days earlier, God Himself had descended in fire, entered into covenant with His people, and they had declared everything the Lord says we will do. Aaron and his sons Nadab and Abihu had even eaten in God's presence on the mountain, and now they are bowing before a golden calf.
That's unthinkable. How could Aaron go this far?
He didn't stop at making the calf. He built an altar for it. He offered sacrifices to it, and worst of all, he declared this idol to be the very God who brought them out of Egypt. In just a few days, the camp of God had desecrated the terms of the covenant even before God could finish writing, and degenerated to a bunch of idol worshippers, enabled by their leader, the very man who should have stood firm.
So, Aaron basically traded God's glory for popularity.
Exactly. Such a crisis demanded a man of firmness, a man of decision and unflinching courage, one who held the honor of God above popular favor, personal safety, or even life itself. Aaron unfortunately, was definitely not that man at that moment. He was a leader shaped by the fear of the people rather than the fear of God. And this is what happens when leaders caving, when they cared more about being liked than about being faithful. The people do not just drift, they plunge headlong into sin. Now, Aaron's failure is a warning. Silence when sin arises, inaction when truth is at stake, or actions that validate a rebellion, these make leaders complicit. Remember this. And today, the cycle repeats itself whenever leaders compromise God's truth to stay comfortable. And when they do, it is not just their reputation at stake, it is the eternal destiny of all those who follow them. Remember this if you ever assume any leadership role, especially in the house of God.
Have you noticed this about sin? Once indulged, it never stops where it started. It always seems to extend to more heinous sins.
Can you please kindly tell me more?
Look at how this unfolded. All of this started probably with a thought, a restless complaint about Moses' delay. Then came a bold request, "Make us gods." Aaron indulges them, and suddenly a golden calf appears similar to some of the gods back in Egypt. But it didn't stop there. The people declared, "Behold your God who brought you out of Egypt." In that single sentence, they replaced the Almighty with an idol. Then Aaron builds an altar in front of it. He proclaims a festival in its honor. And by the next day, the people are offering sacrifices. And by nightfall, they're drinking, feasting, and drowning in wild revelry. Exodus 32:6.
So, in just a matter of days, God's covenant people had turned into idol worshippers, throwing a party in their God's name?
That will be correct. And it all began with one wrong thought entertained. Idolatry does not need to be a golden calf. Sometimes it could be something concealed in the heart or habits. Whatever takes the place of God or His time in our lives is an idol. Now, here's a good example. Take your cell phone, for instance. Nothing wrong with it, right? But if your daily screen time on your phone, scrolling through social media, movies, or whatever else, not for work, is in hours, and yet you cannot spare a couple of minutes to spend with God on His words, newsflash, your phone has become an idol. It is taking the place of God in your life.
This principle and analogy extend to every facet of life. And just like we have seen, idolatry quickly ruptures our relationship with the Lord and leads in a downward moral spiral. So, you might want to do something about it before it extends. Sin, once indulged, never stops politely where you left it. It grows, it spreads, it consumes. Which is why we must surrender it before it spirals out of control.
There is something about idolatry that makes it especially offensive to God. It is a blatant, intentional disregard of the person and authority of God. This was the very reason Lucifer lost his place in heaven. From the account of the Israelites, whenever God is removed from the equation and replaced by whatever else, it usually marks the beginning of a disintegration of morals. And since it is a known principle, we will rise no higher than whatever God we serve. It often results in the introduction of a variety of atrocities
This was the major struggle of the Hebrews while in Egypt, Ezekiel 27-9, during the Exodus, Exodus 25, and even while in the Promised Land, Ezekiel 8:20-22. The most troubling part was that this was happening even in the sanctuary, as in physically in church, but actually worshiping idols. You're probably thinking, that was horrible. How could they? But wait a minute. Are we really any better today?
Good point, Papa Joe. Let's begin with a definition. Okay, so if an idol is anything that takes the place of God in worship or time, anything that captures our imagination, affection, time, and energy more than God, allow me ask again, with this definition, are we really any better today? If God is not at the center of your life, something else will be. And whatever that something is, it will inevitably shape you one day at a time. If you do not cultivate God's living presence, something else will fill that void and trust. Remember this.
This brings us to section 2, verses 7-14. In verse 7-10, the Lord reveals to Moses the rebellion downhill, and between verses 7-8, he hints at what seems most offensive to him. They were arrogating the honor due God to either Moses or the golden calf. And in verse 10, he makes an interesting comment. Now then, let me alone, that my anger may burn against them, and that I may destroy them, and I will make of you a great nation.
God did not need Moses' permission to destroy them if he really wanted to. Reminds me of one of the texts in Ezekiel 22, verse 30, and it reads, So I sought for a man among them who would make a wall and stand in the gap before me on behalf of the land, that I may not destroy it. But I found none. Now, we learn two things from this. One, even in his anger, when we are at our worst, God only resorts to these extremes when every other effort has failed. It is usually not his first preference. Number two, the power of intercession and God's allowance for it. And the statement, now let me alone that my anger may burn against them, God was indirectly giving Moses a chance to step in the gap for the people. He makes room for intercession.
In verses 11-14, Moses intercedes. Pay close attention to how Moses stands in the gap. 1. He addresses the sin in the camp. He begins with the grievances God had highlighted in verses 7-8. The people had arrogated to Moses and the calf their deliverance from Egypt. And when God narrated to Moses their rebellion, he literally repeated their words in verse 7. Go down, because your people, whom you brought up out of Egypt. But Moses immediately corrects that, why should your anger burn against your people, whom you brought out of Egypt with great power? He understood the problem. He doesn't minimize it. He makes no excuses. Instead, he addresses it.
Number two, praying and understanding. Now, the next thing Moses says would only make more sense only after reading Ezekiel 20, verse 8-9. And it reads, now this is God speaking. They did not cast away the detestable things of your eyes, nor did they forsake the idols of Egypt. Then I resolved to pour out my wrath on them to accomplish my anger against them in the midst of the land of Egypt. But I acted for the sake of my name, that it should not be profaned in the sight of the nations among whom they lived, in whose sight I made myself known to them by bringing them out of the land of Egypt.
Apparently, while still in Egypt, some of the Hebrews worshipped the idols of Egypt, provoking God to anger. And he would have unleashed on them. But verses 9 says, "But I acted for the sake of my name, that it should not be profaned in the sight of the nations among whom they lived." God exalts his name and does not like when his name that we bear gets profaned. And destroying them now will do just that. So, in understanding, Moses hints at this in verse 12, saying, "Why give the Egyptians a reason to say it was because you couldn't take them to the promised land, like you promised that you have destroyed them?"
In verse 13, Moses presents the argument of the integrity of the Word of God. He goes, Lord, you promised. He understood that God exalts his words above his name. Psalms 138, verse 2. And he made this the premise of his petition. Again, praying in understanding. By the time we get to verse 14, the Lord had relented in his anger and handed to Moses the two tablets of stone containing the Decalogue.
This brings us to section 3, verses 15 to 24. Moses arrives to the camp, but what he sees is offensive. Just moments earlier, Moses was interceding with God, begging for mercy on behalf of the people. But when he saw with his own eyes what God had already described, he was so angry he smashed the tablets of stone containing the Decalogue, carved by the very hand of God.
And yes, God will later replace them, but that act showed something important. Moses was not indifferent to sin. He hated it. He refused to minimize it. This helps us understand better one of the reasons why God may have chosen him over his older brother Aaron. Moses called sin exactly what it is: sin. He directly rebuked Aaron and the people, each one for their roles. He then took a practical step of removing the sin from their midst by destroying the golden calf before their eyes.
And what about Aaron? How did he answer?
In Aaron's confession and plea for mercy, to his credit, he was mostly honest till the part where he goes, "I threw the gold into the fire, and out came this calf," almost hinting at a miracle. There was nothing miraculous about that. He shaped it, one piece at a time. But notice, that's how sin works. We downplay it. We try to soften it. We make excuses to lessen its magnitude, especially when it's intentional. Can you relate? Twisting our words and contorting the storyline to make our sin look smaller, when in reality, it's as deliberate as Aaron's golden calf. It's important to remember that confession without honesty is just another form of deception.
In section 4, verses 25 to 29, you'll think that after everything, the idol, the revelry, Moses' rebuke, the people will finally break down in repentance, but not really. Some were still unmoved, still defiant. Can you imagine?
Seriously? After all that, they still refuse to change? But wait, how do you know that?
Well, verse 26 shows us how Moses responded after rebuking them. He made an open call, a chance for a fresh start. Whoever is for the Lord, come to me. And in that moment, everyone had to decide. No fence sitting. Allegiance was either with God or against God.
This should be interesting. So, who stood with Moses?
The text suggests it was mostly the Levites that took a stand with Moses for God. Surprisingly, about 3,000 people refused the call. Can you beat that? They stood their ground in open rebellion, just like Lucifer and his angels. And with that decision, they sealed their fate. Moses made sure of that.
That's heavy. So even after mercy and second chances, some people will still choose defiance?
Unfortunately, I will have to say yes, Casey. And it's a sobering truth. Every call to allegiance demands a response. Silence, hesitation, or rebellion. They all reveal where we stand. Please do not harden your hearts today.
And finally, we reach section 5, verses 30 to 35. Moses, understanding the enormity of what had just happened, returns to the Lord the next day to intercede for the people. It will be yet another mountain climb. He had barely rested from the last trip, and 24 hours later, he made his way back up Sinai to seek the Lord in prayers. Do not forget this guy is in his 80s.
When he arrived, the conversation that ensues is interesting. Moses began by acknowledging their sin plainly. No excuses, no cover-ups. Then he pleaded for forgiveness. But here's the stunning part. He added, "If you will not forgive them, blot me out of the book you have written."
He was willing to give up his own place, his eternity, just to save them?
That is correct. Moses was willing to stand in their place if that's what it took. A foreshadowing of the one who truly would. And God's reply? Calm but firm. Moses, you don't need to worry about this. I've got this. Let's get back to leading our people home. But know this, when the time comes for punishment and judgment, I would hold each sinner accountable.
So God forgave them, but the consequences would still come?
Exactly. That's one of the takeaway lessons. God's mercy is real, His forgiveness sure. But sin still leaves scars, and God is not mocked, which is why grace should never be treated lightly. Mercy spares us from eternal judgment. But we might still have to deal with the consequences of bad choices while here.
And that's a wrap for this week's episode. Next week, the journey continues in episode 12, titled, Please Show Me Your Glory. Until then, stay humble, stay teachable. I remain your Sebastian Doodle, doodling out, still making it make sense, one study at a time.
But hold on before you click away.
If today's message stirred even a whisper in your heart, don't keep it to yourself. Smash that like, drop a comment, share this with someone who needs a faith boost, and hey, if you haven't yet made that life-changing decision to follow Christ, the invitation is still open. Don't wait. The clock is ticking, and grace is calling. Remember, we weren't born just to survive and pay bills. We're still auditioning to reign in heaven. No retreat, no surrender.